Idris Elba in the studio. Thank you very much for coming into Beats One London. How often do you actually get to spend in London these days, Idris?
I live here. I live in London. I used to live in the States, and people think I live in the States now, but I've been home for a long time, so I'm home.
This is still home. That's good to hear. And it's a big part of the new film as well, Yardie, which comes out on Friday. Had the pleasure of seeing it. One of the things that I really loved about it is that the footage of London that you see, it's set in the 70s and 80s, but it actually looks, you don't really need to dress up the buildings or anything, do you? They still kind of look the same now.
That's one thing about London, that, it hasn't been overly, there are some beautiful new builds, there's some beautiful new architecture, but some of the areas haven't lost their original charm, and that's good. I think it keeps some of the character of London, and essentially, it's a big part, it's one of the characters in the film. It is. The film sort of really highlights coming to England, coming to London, and here he is.
Because it was a book, first of all. When did you first read it?
In I would say late 80s, early 90s, and that cusp in that era. I was a teenager. The book was sort of making the rounds around the Afro-Caribbean community as something to read. I was young, I didn't want to read, but reading that book was one of those moments for me. I remember it being quite visceral. The lead character was someone I could relate to. He was a sound boy, I was a sound boy. So it was one of those books that sort of stuck in my consciousness. And
it's your first role as director as well. How did you find this? And what kind of director do you think you are? Are you pushy, are you hard-going, are you easygoing?
I found it really sort of just a blessing. I've gotten the privilege to watch a lot of directors work in my career as an actor. But then here I am, in that front seat. I really loved it. I mean, I've had an amazing experience. I think that I learned a lot about directing on the job. I think it's a great movie. I'm very proud of it. But at the same time, it's my first one. And I'm very open to say, there's things that I learned about myself and the film and,
I'm kind of interested. We spoke a little bit before about you growing up in Hackney. What is your fondest memory of that time? If you had to pick kind of one scene, can you easily put it together now of what it was like?
So many, if I'm honest, but I kind of remember when Princess Diana and Prince Charles got married, right?
Wow.
And it was like a big celebration in front of my 4 tower blocks. There were 4 at the time. There's only 1 remained in there now on Queensbridge Road. And everyone had the coronations out. Everyone was out on the grass in front of the buildings. It was like a carnival. And I remember that, like, the local pub at the time was called the Middleton Arms. It was right next there.
Is that still there now?
No, it's turned into flats now. But I remember that as a fond memory. I loved my flats, man. It was one of those flats that had garages underneath, and when you used to ride your BMX bikes in there, you felt like you was in Star Wars or something because it was like tunnels and tunnels.
Were you a good kid?
Yeah, I was. I was like an only child, so I was quite mature. When you're around older parents, and, you just sort of kind of. I didn't do nothing crazy until much later.
What time did you start getting crazy? How old were you then?
I think when I was about 14, 15, okay. I moved from Hackney, moved to Canning Town, and Canning Town was a very different engine, different area. It was a big national front area, so you had to be on your toes a little bit. You had to be a bit,
What would you say to a 13-year-old kid growing up in Hackney now? Because it's changed so much, isn't it? Yeah. And I know from, you get back there, it's not like you never go back to where you're from. You still live in London.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's interesting because, like, I go back to Hackney not too often these days because I honestly don't recognise it. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean, it's lovely that it's a big popular town, but I walk down Dalston, I'm like, wow, I can't even believe this is Dalston. Do you know what I mean? It's very, very different when I was growing up. Do you know what I mean? A young 13-year-old, I would just say, listen, man, you know what I mean? Like, enjoy your culture, because culture is a thing that it goes through a watering down. The more popular a culture it gets, the more watered down at the edges it gets.
When you were making Yardie and researching that, did you try and find or rediscover some of those old feelings that you had when you were a kid to try and get the vibe right? Yeah.
I mean, especially in the art design, if you look at the art design of the film, we spend a lot of time, we got relics. I mean, really old stuff that still exists but doesn't exist in anyone's house or modern.
Yeah.
It's like museum pieces. So when we were putting together, Yvonne's flat, And I said, listen, we need a porcelain Jesus,
Yeah.
you know, the blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus, you know, with the hand up. And it was a very specific Jesus that you could only find in Western Caribbean houses, probably, and Irish houses, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Talking to the production designers about that was like going down memory lane. It was a bit like therapy.
Yeah,
it was like, what was the carpets like? I was like, oh man, you know, my dad used to smoke, so
Stained.
I remember, stained. And carpet burns, because my dad used to smoke in the house, like, you know, like I mean, and there would always be like ash burns on the floor.
Wow. The soundtrack is incredible,
Thanks,
if I
man.
may say so. It's
Thank
on
you,
Apple
bro.
Music now. Must have been a lot of fun to put that together, right?
Yeah, it was, you know, it was just sort of really digging into the deepest record box that I could find.
It is.
Taking me back to my early years. There were songs in the beginning of the film. We start in Jamaica in 1970 when I was just born in 1972. And here I was, you know, picking tunes that were relevant to the culture, were quite still relevant to the culture we were shooting in Kingston. And so it was a real joy. You know, Jamaica is definitely known for putting out great music. So a movie about Jamaican culture without good music would have been a tragedy.
Oh, God, yeah, you couldn't even go there. What's your favourite tune on the soundtrack? You had to pick one.
Carlton and the Shoes.
Which is late 60s, isn't it, that song?
Yeah, that is a
That's
Studio One.
really going back.
Yeah, it's a Studio One classic. I love that. I mean, you know, it plays a big part in the film as a tune that one of the characters plays, and it brings the community together. It's a good moment.
I like that, and I like the Skip Marley tune as well, which is Skip is Bob's grandson?
Grandson, yeah.
And he covers Johnny Was.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a new cover that they did just for the film?
Well, weirdly enough, that cover, Bob Marley went to Barcelona to do a live show, and he did Johnny Was. And the story is that the band wasn't quite together. They didn't know it, so he did an acoustic version of it. And it's a deep, deep song. And we heard this recording of it, and I was like, I just want to make that. I didn't want to make the original. I wanted to make that version of it. So I played it to Skip. Salam Remy is a great producer. He is in Miami, and Skip went to his house. I was on Skype because I couldn't get there. And so I got Salam Remy, I got Skip Marley, and there was this real magic moment when Skip's just listening to the version of the song, and he picks up a guitar. And because of the Skype, the way it's sitting there, I'm looking at this image, and I see young Skip with his dreads, and he's got the guitar, and he's singing. I had goosebumps all over my body. I was like, wow. It was like watching young Bob go at it.
Wow.
And singing, you know, Johnny Was for the first time. We were very lucky to get that on that record, and yeah.
Dude, it's great to chat to you.
You too, Matt, yeah.